I heard my father say it before I ever saw his face again. Let her go. 9 words that cost him everything. Let her go. We won't pay for the surgery. The surgeon was standing beside my hospital bed. My father was 3 feet away from me, and I was in a coma, 32 years old, unconscious, unable to answer, unable to tell anyone that I wanted to live, unable to tell anyone that the man making decisions about my future had already decided I wasn't worth the expense. Like he was discussing a broken appliance instead of his daughter. My father signed paperwork that day. A do not resuscitate patient. He tried to stop a surgery that would save my life. And he was completely certain nobody would ever question it. And that I would never wake up. 3 days later, I opened my eyes. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't confront anyone. I spent 5 quiet weeks getting stronger. Reading. Watching. Listening. Collecting information. Then I made one phone call. Just one. 24 hours later, everything my father had spent 30 years building collapsed so completely that even the bank couldn't stop it. But here's the part they forgot while they were calculating whether I was worth saving. There was only one signature that actually mattered. One signature holding together the company my father spent 4 years pretending belonged to him.
Mine.
And once I understood exactly what they'd done, I stopped acting like a daughter. I started acting like an engineer. The funny thing is that none of them saw it coming. Not my father. Not my mother. Not my brother. Not even the people helping them. They all thought the hardest part was over. They thought the coma had ended the story. In reality, the coma was where the story started. And the deeper I looked into what happened while I was unconscious, the less it looked like a panicked family making impossible decisions. It started looking like something else. Because there was one question I couldn't stop asking myself. Why was everyone so nervous that I survived? Why was my father trying to get signatures for me 4 days after I woke up? Why was my brother suddenly blocking simple requests for company records? And why did every road somehow lead back to the exact construction project I was driving to inspect before the accident happened? I didn't have those answers, but I was about to find them. And when I did, the people who had spent years treating me like an expense were finally going to discover what a liability looks like. Before I tell you how any of that happened, drop a comment below and tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Have you ever had someone who is supposed to love you treat you like a cost instead? Then you know what I felt. And if stories about betrayal, hidden truths, and the kind of justice that comes from patience and lawful revenge are your things, subscribe and stay with me. Because what happened after I woke up still sounds unbelievable when I say it out loud. The first thing I remember wasn't the light. It wasn't the machines or pain. It was a plastic band wrapped around my left wrist. Purple. Something about it felt wrong immediately. I couldn't explain why. Maybe it was because I'd spent enough years around job sites to understand that colors mean things. All I knew was that some part of my brain recognized that purple wasn't good. Then a nurse walked into the room. She stopped so suddenly in the doorway that I noticed it even through the fog. Her name tag read Marisol Reyes. She looked at me the way people look at something impossible. Like she'd expected to see an empty bed. "You're awake," she said carefully. I tried to answer. What came out sounded like gravel dragged across concrete. Marisol crossed the room quickly. She checked the monitors. Then she pulled a small pair of scissors from her pocket. "Hold still, honey." She cut the purple band off my wrist. Immediately, without hesitation. Then she folded it into her palm and slipped it away. Like evidence. I watched every movement. I had no idea what the band meant, but I could see. She didn't want anyone else seeing it. "What is that?" I finally managed. Marisol looked toward the hallway. "Something that should never have been on you." The answer didn't make me feel better. Another question surfaced in my mind. Who had put it there?
And why?
An hour later, the doctor arrived. His name was Dr. Okafor. He explained the medical side first. Car accident. Internal bleeding. Emergency surgery. 3 days sedated. Unconscious. 3 days I couldn't remember. That all made sense.
Then he got to the part that didn't.
Marisol stayed near the door. Dr. Okafor chose his words carefully. Too carefully. "When you arrived, he said. A family member attempted to refuse consent for the surgery. I stared at him. He identified himself as your medical decision maker. My stomach tightened. He also requested that you be designated do not resuscitate if your heart stopped during surgery. I already knew the answer before I asked.
Who?
Then Dr. Okafor answered. Your father. Everything went quiet. Not the machines.
Just me.
Then Marisol spoke. And she repeated the exact words spoken while surgeons were trying to save my life. Let her go. We won't pay for the surgery. 9 words that never got smaller no matter how many times I replayed them. Because he wasn't talking about pain, about quality of life. He was talking about a bill. For the first time in my life, I started wondering what else my family had been calculating behind my back. You should know who I am, because it matters for everything that comes after. My name is Caroline Hathaway, and I am 32 and a structural engineer, PE license, which means the state of Ohio trusts me to stamp a set of drawings and say a building won't fall down, and people get to believe me. No one paid my tuition. I worked summers as a laborer on framing crews to cover community college, transferred to a state school, and sat for the exam twice before I passed. To this day, the smell of fresh cut pine takes me straight back to a job site at 6 o'clock in the morning. Sawdust in my hair, learning how real things get built by men who didn't talk much and respected me only after I outworked them. I loved it. I still do. I'm not loud. My friends would tell you I read contracts the way other people read their horoscopes, looking for the line that's going to ruin my week. That carefulness is why my father came to me 4 years ago after his own license was gone and asked me to be the engineer of record for the family firm Hathaway Builders. He framed it as a favor, a bridge, a temporary thing until he sorted himself out. Just temporarily, Caroline. Until I stabilize things. That was the word he used. Stabilize. Like he was talking about a structure, not a failing business.
I should have seen it then.
But I didn't. The favor I did out of duty was about to become the only thing standing between my dad and ruin. Roy Hathaway, 61. Man who could shake your hand at church and make you feel chosen. My mother, Lisa, 58, who never raised her voice.
She didn't argue.
She adjusted reality until you questioned your own memory. And my brother, Brett, he didn't build anything. But he always stood near the thing that was already built and called it his. VP of Operations. A title that sounded heavier than it actually was. And me? I was the one who signed. The one who carried liability. Growing up, the money flowed one direction toward Brett, and the bills flowed the other toward me. I had a long hospital stay as a kid. Asthma. Nothing dramatic, but expensive. And my mother never let me forget the number. She used to describe me as expensive child to my relatives on Christmas and birthdays, and that too not with pride. With tiredness. Comment down below if you've ever been called a cost by someone who is supposed to love you for free. And subscribe. The first real crack wasn't loud. It was paperwork. Brookline Commons. A mixed-use development project that was supposed to put Hathaway Builders on the map. The same place where early in the morning of the accident I was driving. Ground floor retail. Apartments above. The kind of project that either makes a company or buries it. I had questions about it early on. Too many gaps in permits. Too many delayed responses. So I asked for records.
Twice.
And got nothing back. Not answers. Not clarity. Just silence dressed up as we're handling it. I decided to drive out and look at the site myself with a folder of paperwork on my passenger seat that I meant to reconcile against the county records. Same morning of the accident. I remember it too clearly now. I never made it. A landscaping truck ran a red light.
Speeding.
50 miles an hour. And everything after that turned into white noise. When I woke up, I wasn't in control of anything anymore. Not my body.
Not my job.
Not my name. 3 days unconscious. Machines keeping time for me. And somewhere in that gap, my father made a decision. A decision I didn't hear until later. Let her go. We won't pay for the surgery. 9 words. That was the math he used on me. Not fear. Not panic. And the worst part? He said it like it made sense. Like it was reasonable. Like I was already reduced to a line item. When I finally understood that, something in me didn't break. It went quiet. And engineers don't panic. We trace load paths. They did the surgery anyway, and they kept me sedated while my body knit itself back together. 5 weeks after waking up, I stopped acting like a patient. I started acting like a problem solver. Because something about the situation didn't match. The purple wristband Marisol had cut off me. The way she avoided explaining it. The way Dr. Okafor chose his words like he was stepping around something fragile. Marisol told me without valid legal authority and without any directive from me. Neither Dad's refusal nor the DNR had any standing. And the physician's duty was to treat. So they treated. I lived because Marisol, a nurse I'd never met, refused to take my father at his word. My father showed up on day for like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't been left for dead. He came with flowers too big for the room. His voice loud. Carefully emotional. My girl is back. My mother behind him, perfectly arranged relief on her face. And Brett hovering in the background like he didn't know where to place his guilt. But I had spent 3 days hearing the truth in a hospital room when they thought I was gone. So I didn't react. I watched. Then came the paperwork. My father leaned in close, voice soft enough for only family to hear. Just some insurance forms, sweetheart. While you rest. He slid the clipboard toward me. He had a pen ready, for days awake from a coma, and the first thing my father wanted was my signature. I glanced a bit. Control transfer. Signature dependency. I didn't refuse loudly. I just didn't sign. That was the first time I saw the flicker in his expression. Not anger. Concern. The kind a man has when something he expected to control starts resisting. I told him I'd read it later. And I watched him accept that answer too quickly. Like someone recalculating. That night I made my first call. Not to them. To the county office. To Dana. A permit technician I had worked with for years. A professional voice I trusted more than my own family at that point. I asked about Brookline Commons. She answered casually. Too casually. Oh yes, that closed last month. Your stamp is on the final submittal. My stamp. I didn't speak for a few seconds. I hadn't stamped anything in months. Not since the accident. Not since before the coma. Which meant something impossible had already happened. My name had been used while I was unconscious. And not just used. Replicated. That was the moment everything stopped being emotional. And started becoming technical. That night, I went to my desk drawer. Opened it slowly. And pulled out my engineer's seal. Cold metal.
Real.
Heavy.
Mine.
And for the first time, since waking up, I understood the shape of what I was dealing with. So I did what I always do. I started collecting proof. And that's when I realized something else. There had already been an attempt to remove me from the system. 5 months before the accident, I had filed formal withdrawal as engineer of record. Everything proper. Everything documented. But it never finalized. After seeing my own seal, I opened the laptop. Already knew what I was about to confirm. Whatever Dana saw did not come from this. Then I did what I should have done the moment I woke up. I pulled the Brookline Commons submittal logs. Revision history. Approval chain. Timestamp records. Every engineer knows the truth lives in the metadata, not the signatures. And there it was. My name. Caroline Hathaway. Engineer of record. Stamped on drawings dated inside the exact window I was sedated in a hospital bed. Because this wasn't a mistake. Mistakes don't align this cleanly. This required access. Timing. That's when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer it, but something about the timing made me pick up. Caroline. Brett's voice came through immediately. Too fast. Too tight. Like he had been waiting outside the call. You're home, right? I am, I said. A pause. Then he exhaled like he was trying to sound normal. Good. I just listen. Don't stress about work stuff. Dad's got everything under control. He kept going. The permits are just messy right now. Systems are updating. County stuff, you know how it is. I closed my eyes for a second, because I had heard that exact sentence before. From people who were lying badly. and from people who were lying confidently. This isn't about systems, I said quietly. A pause on the line. Just rest, he said quickly. We'll handle everything. Then he hung up. Now it wasn't just Dana's confirmation. It was Brett's reaction. And reaction tells you more than information ever will. The next morning I drove to the county building. Dana was behind the counter when I walked in. She smiled like normal. Hey, you're up early. I need to see Brookline Commons filings. Her expression shifted slightly. Not fear. Just confusion. That's all public record, she said. But sure, I can pull it. I need the engineer of record submission package, I interrupted. She pulled the files. Printed sheets. Stamped approvals. Revision history. And placed them in front of me. I didn't touch them immediately. I read the top page first. My name. My license number. My seal imprint. I flipped the page. Same thing. And then I saw it. The stamped impression. It was mine. But it wasn't mine. Engineers learn this early. You don't just look at what is there. You look at pressure, ink distribution, alignment stress. Even the smallest deviation tells you whether something was applied physically or digitally reconstructed. This wasn't my seal. It was reconstructed, copied, simulated, and the county had accepted it. I set the file down slowly. Dana was watching me now. You okay? She asked. I nodded once. This wasn't just forgery. They inserted me into a workflow I wasn't present for, which meant one thing. They didn't need me awake. They only needed my name functional. Because if my name could be used without me, then my absence wasn't a problem. It was part of the plan. I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine and headed back home. Before leaving, I requested Dana asking for the complete issued submittal package currently on file. She emailed it less than an hour later. I printed the cover sheet first. Then I laid it on my dining table. The date hit me before anything else. 3 days into my coma. And someone had stamped my name onto official engineering documents. Then I started comparing. Correct from catastrophic. Real from counterfeit. The forged seal was good. Very good. Good enough to fool the county. But I was looking. And after 20 minutes, I found it. I leaned closer. The spacing. One digit sat slightly tighter against the next than it should have. Barely noticeable. I pulled out an old project from 2 years earlier. A set I had personally stamped. Then I laid the documents side by side.
Real. Fake. Real. Fake.
The difference was undeniable. I sat back in my chair. The house was completely quiet, because it explained everything. The surgery, the forged permits, the panic, the pressure,
The lies.
They didn't want Caroline. They wanted Caroline's name. And those are two very different things. I looked down at the documents spread across my table. Then I whispered, not anymore. The next question was who did it? Who pressed the seal? Who handled the paperwork? Who moved the documents? Over the next few days, I made calls. Just conversations. People I had worked with for years. Project coordinators. Former coworkers. Administrative staff. People who still trusted me. And slowly the picture emerged. The name that kept appearing was Toby. 23 years old. Junior permit coordinator. Good kid. Nervous. Hardworking. Toby had been filing Brookline paperwork for months. Using a seal handed to him by management. He believed it was authorized. Believed it was legitimate. They hadn't recruited a criminal. They'd recruited obedience. Much easier. Much safer. And much harder for the kid to recognize. The forged closeout confirmations I'd been receiving suddenly made sense too. Every document telling me another engineer was taking over. All of it had come from my father's office. Most people think revenge begins with anger. Mine didn't. Mine began with a legal pad. I sat at my kitchen table the next morning and started drawing lines. Not emotional lines. Structural ones. Connections. Dependencies. Obligations. Liabilities. The same way I'd map a building. By noon, my legal pad looked like a blueprint.
Permit. Bond.
Construction loan. Bank covenants. Engineer of record. Every arrow eventually pointed to the same place.
Me.
I laughed once. because it was absurd. My father had spent 4 years convincing me I was replaceable. Meanwhile, he'd quietly built his entire company around the one thing only I could provide: my license, my professional authority. He had spent years telling me I wasn't important, while making himself completely dependent on me. Right after 2 days, I carried my folder into the office of attorney Karen Vogel. Karen was the kind of lawyer who never wasted words, just competence. I spread everything across her conference table: the forged seal, the original documents, the withdrawal paperwork, the hospital records. Karen read in silence, page after page, occasionally making a note, occasionally circling something. Nearly 40 minutes passed before she finally looked up. Then she removed her glasses. "Let me make sure I understand this." I nodded. "You're the engineer of record." "Yes." "You attempted to leave months ago." "Yes." "And someone continued certifying documents under your license while you were medically incapacitated." "Yes." "That's remarkably reckless." I laughed softly. "That's one word for it." What followed wasn't revenge planning. It was legal reality. Karen walked me through every step, every obligation, everything my license demanded. Reporting the forgery was necessary. Withdrawing properly wasn't spite. It was professional responsibility. Karen folded her hands. "There's a difference between knocking down a building and refusing to keep holding it up." "I've been holding it up my whole life," she smiled. "Then maybe it's time to put your arms down." The paperwork was ready. The evidence was ready. The truth was ready. The only thing left was timing. And my father had already chosen that for me when he scheduled a ribbon-cutting ceremony and invited half the town to watch. He thought he was planning a celebration. He had no idea he was building a stage. And stages work both ways. The night before everything would be filed, there was a knock on my condo door. I opened it and found my father standing there. My father stood in the hallway with his hands shoved into the pockets of a dark jacket I had seen him wear 100 times before. He looked older. "Can I come in?" he asked. His voice was quiet, almost careful. I stepped aside. He entered slowly and looked around my condo. The same condo he'd visited maybe 4 times in 6 years. I closed the door. He sat on the couch. For a moment, I thought maybe he'd come to apologize. Because part of me still wanted to believe people could surprise you, even after everything. "Dad, everything okay?" Then he finally spoke. "You know," he said, "there's something I never told you. 9 years earlier, before Brookline Commons, before the expansion, before the company started advertising itself as one of the fastest-growing builders in Central Ohio, there had been a deck collapse, a backyard party, a subcontractor mistake, bad framing. A man fell 12 feet onto concrete. The injuries were catastrophic. The lawsuits nearly destroyed Hathaway Builders. Investigators eventually traced responsibility back through the project. My father's license was revoked. Insurance companies fled. Banks got nervous. Clients disappeared. According to him, everything he'd spent decades building nearly vanished in a matter of months. As he talked, something changed in his voice. The performance softened. Not disappeared. Softened. For the first time in my life, I heard genuine fear. Not ego. Fear. I thought it was over. His eyes stayed on the floor. I thought I'd lose the company, the house, the business. Pause. The family. For one brief moment, I saw something I'd never really seen before. The wound underneath the behavior. The terrified man hiding behind the successful one. He rubbed his hands together. I built it all back. His voice cracked slightly. Everything. Then he looked at me, directly. And for a heartbeat, he looked like a father. Not a businessman. Not a manipulator. Not a man calculating costs and benefits. Just a father. I almost reached for him. I really did. Because people don't talk enough about how badly we want our parents to be better. Even when we're adults. Even when they've hurt us. Part of you keeps waiting. Hoping. Maybe this is where everything changes. Then he ruined it. Completely. So don't blow this up. The words landed between us like concrete. My chest tightened instantly. Not because they were loud. This was the real reason he'd come. Not remorse. He leaned forward. This doesn't need to become a thing. A thing. I stared at him. Dad? My coma was a thing. The forged seal was a thing. Trying to let me die was a thing. What's done is done, he continued, his voice steadier now. The surgery, the hospital. The order. All of it. I didn't move. That was a terrible situation. Then came the sentence. The sentence that finally killed the last hopeful piece of me. I would have paid if it made sense. Silence.
Not. I'm sorry. Not.
I was wrong.
Not.
I panicked.
Not.
I failed you.
No.
I sat back slowly. The conversation was over. Not verbally. Emotionally. The moment had passed. The father I almost reached for disappeared. I stayed silent, and he thought he convinced me enough. Eventually he stood. I didn't mention the paperwork or Karen or the filings waiting to be sent. He walked toward the door. He looked back and said quietly, "Don't do something you'll regret." I opened the door. Then answered honestly, "I won't." I locked the door behind him. Then stood there for a long time. The condo was silent again. But something inside me had changed. Certainty. I would have paid if it made sense. That was the whole story. 32 years reduced to one sentence. I walked into the kitchen. The paperwork sat waiting on the table. I made tea. Hours passed while I reviewed every page one final time. Because precision matters. I opened the drawer beside my desk and took out the purple wristband. Marisol had removed it the day I woke up. I'd kept it ever since. As evidence. I turned it over my fingers and set it beside the envelopes. For the first time after the hospital, I felt completely calm. At 8 o'clock the next morning, Karen would send everything. The licensing board, the project owner, the surety company, the bank, every filing, every exhibit, every document, properly dated, properly filed, properly recorded. Just truth moving through official channels. I placed the purple wristband back into the drawer, closed it, sealed the final envelope, and went to bed. I slept better that night than I had in years, because by then I finally understood something my father never had. The next morning, while Karen's filings began arriving in offices across Ohio, Hathaway Builders was preparing for the biggest celebration in company history, a ribbon-cutting ceremony for Brookline Commons. My father thought he was waking up on the day of his coronation. He had no idea he was waking up on the day of his reckoning. Rows of white folding chairs lined the new sidewalk. Fresh landscaping framed the entrance. A long gold ribbon stretched across the front doors, the oversized ceremonial scissors on a velvet cushion near the podium. I arrived a few minutes before the ceremony started. No grand entrance. I wore a simple navy dress and parked near the back of the lot. Then I found a place at the edge of the crowd.
Close enough to see.
Far enough to disappear. Exactly where I wanted to be. The mayor was there. Several local business owners. A representative from the surety company. The project lender. A reporter from the county paper. A photographer carrying 2 cameras around his neck.
People laughed.
Shook hands. Complimented the building. My father moved through the crowd like a politician on election day, smiling, shaking hands, telling stories, accepting congratulations. Across the crowd, my mother stood beside him. Pearls, perfect hair, perfect smile, everything carefully arranged, just like always. Brett followed a few steps behind, carrying trays of plastic champagne flutes. My father spotted me once. His expression shifted. Surprise, relief, calculation. Then he smiled. The same confident smile he'd worn my entire life. He gave me a small nod. I returned it. Nothing more. Then the ceremony began. The mayor stepped to the podium first. People applauded politely. Then he introduced my father, who walked forward to enthusiastic clapping. The photographer moved closer. The reporter uncapped his pen. My father adjusted the microphone and launched into the version of himself he'd spent 30 years perfecting. He talked about hard work,
family,
sacrifice, building something from nothing, creating jobs, giving back. The audience loved it,
Of course they did.
because it wasn't entirely false. He gestured toward the building behind him. This project, he said proudly, is proof that when people believe in family, anything is possible. The crowd applauded again. I stood silently near the back, watching, waiting. While he was speaking, Karen's filings had already been sitting in inboxes for hours. The licensing board, the surety company, the project owner, the bank. The machinery had already started moving. No one here knew it yet, not even my father. He finished his speech. More applause. More photographs. The mayor shook his hand. Everything proceeding exactly according to plan. The mayor stepped beside him. My mother smiled for the cameras. Brett raised a champagne flute. The gold ribbons stretched tight. And then, the bank representative's phone buzzed.
It was such a small thing.
Most people didn't notice. I did, because I was watching. He glanced down, read the screen, and frowned. Stepped aside from crowd as he spoke quietly into the phone. A few seconds later, the surety representative's phone lit up. She looked down, read something, then immediately stopped smiling. Read another message. Typed again.
Fast.
Focused. Professional. My father never noticed. He was too busy enjoying the moment. The scissors opened. The ribbon stretched. The gold fabric fluttered to the ground. Applause erupted. For 3 seconds, everything looked exactly the way he wanted. Then reality arrived. The bank representative walked directly toward him. He said something quietly. I saw my father's face. The color drained out of it instantly. His smile vanished. He blinked, then held up his phone. My father's eyes moved across the screen. The surety representative joined them, now showing her own phone, pointing toward documents. The atmosphere shifted. A city inspector appeared from somewhere near the entrance, holding a bright orange notice. That got attention. Heads turned, guests began whispering. The reporter drifted closer. Something was wrong. No one knew what. Then I heard fragments. Small pieces carried across the crowd. Engineer of record. Pending investigation. Forged seal. Stop work order. Each phrase landed like a hammer. The confusion spread. The mayor stepped back. The smiles disappeared. And finally, my father turned, his eyes searching desperately through the crowd, looking for the one thing he believed could still save him.
Me.
When he found me standing near the back, relief flashed across his face. Actual relief. Like a drowning man spotting land. There she is. His voice carried farther than he intended. People turned, following his gaze. Every head pivoted toward me. Caroline. I stayed where I was. Caroline, he called again. Louder. My father pointed. She's the engineer.
Confident again. Certain.
Tell them. Tell them it's fine. And suddenly every single person who had never listened before was waiting for me to speak.
So I did. Calmly. Clearly.
I'm not the engineer of record anymore. The silence deepened. I formally withdrew this morning through the proper channels. No one moved. The seal used on the most recent permit filings isn't mine. I reported the forgery to the state board. The reporter's pen began moving faster. The photographer raised his camera again.
My father stared at me. Not angry yet.
Not fully. Mostly shocked. I met his eyes. And delivered the sentence I'd spent weeks preparing. You wanted to let me go to save money, Dad. I took a breath. And finished. So, I let something go too. My name. The words settled over the crowd. Heavy. Final. Irreversible. My father took a step toward me. Then another. Like someone trying to outrun reality. Caroline.
His voice cracked. There has to be some mistake, he said.
The withdrawal has already been received. My father turned to banker. What withdrawal? The engineer of record withdrawal. The one filed this morning. My father stared. The surety representative stepped forward. Because the engineer of record has withdrawn and a forgery complaint has been filed, the bond is being suspended pending review. The words sounded boring. Someone in the crowd asked quietly, "What does that mean?" The banker answered before anyone else could. It means construction financing is frozen until the issue is resolved. The city inspector finally stepped forward carrying the bright orange notice, pulled tape from his pocket, and secured the notice to the glass door. Stop work order. Brookline Commons had gone from flagship project to active investigation in less than 10 minutes. My father stared at the notice, then at me, then back at the notice, like his brain couldn't decide which disaster deserved attention first. That's when my mother broke. She turned toward him. What is happening? Her voice was sharp. You said this was handled. Now people were openly watching. You swore there wasn't a problem. Still no answer. Surety representative was already making another phone call. The banker was typing emails. The machinery had started moving. And nobody in that crowd possessed the authority to stop it. Especially not my father. Then Brett made his move. Not toward my father.
Toward me.
Of course he did. He always had. Whenever things went wrong, Brett looked for someone else to carry the weight. Usually me. Caroline, do you have any idea what you just did? I turned. He grabbed my arm. Not violently.
Desperately.
Please. Please fix this. His voice cracked. Actual tears sat in his eyes. The first completely genuine thing I'd seen from him in years. They'll listen to you. I removed his hands.
No.
His face collapsed. Not anger.
Fear.
Pure fear. My father finally lost his temper. The way overloaded structures fail.
A crack.
He spun toward me. What did you do?
Even now.
Even here. Standing in the ruins of his own decisions. He still believed he was the victim. It's you, not me. That's all I said. That seemed to anger him more than any speech could have. By then, the ceremony was effectively over. The ceremony wasn't the disaster. It was only the announcement. The real collapse would happen over the next 24 hours. Quietly. Legally. Relentlessly. By the time I reached home that afternoon, the first domino had already fallen. The bank froze the next construction draw. Millions of dollars. Gone with a single decision. Without that money, subcontractors couldn't be paid. Payroll couldn't be met. Invoices couldn't clear. And everyone who depended on that money started making phone calls. The surety suspension followed. By evening, subcontractors were demanding answers. By nightfall, suppliers were refusing new deliveries.
Before sunrise, attorneys were involved.
And all across central Ohio, people who had spent years returning my father's calls suddenly stopped answering. 24 hours after the ribbon cutting, Hathaway Builders wasn't officially bankrupt yet. That paperwork would take a little longer. But everyone already knew. The company was finished.
The part that could be saved had passed.
And the man who once believed I was too expensive to keep alive was sitting in a house full of ringing phones he couldn't answer. Because, for the first time in his life, the cost had finally come due. 30 years of my father's identity reduced to boxes of records and meetings with attorneys. The State Engineering Board opened a formal investigation into the forged seal. Toby, the junior employee who had been using the counterfeit stamp, cooperated immediately. The poor kid looked sick when investigators interviewed him. He genuinely believed he had been following authorized instructions, which was exactly why I never blamed him. My father, meanwhile, spent those weeks doing what he'd always done, looking for someone else to blame.
Me.
Mostly me. Karen forwarded one email he sent through his attorney. I read it once, then deleted it. The house in Marysville went on the market before summer ended. So did the lake property. My mother loved posting pictures from every holiday. I drove past the house once. The real estate sign stood in the front yard. I saw every version of myself that had ever walked through that front door. The little girl with asthma. The teenager paying her own tuition. The young engineer carrying a company on her license. The woman lying in a hospital bed, hearing that she wasn't worth the cost. Then the light changed. And I kept driving because some places stop being home long before you leave them. My mother called exactly twice. Both times through Karen. Both times asking if I would reconsider. Not apologize. Not reconcile. Reconsider. I never responded. Brett texted more often. At first it was panic. Then anger. Then bargaining. Then silence. One message read, "Dad says you ruined everything." I stared at it for a while. Then typed a single response.
No.
I stopped saving it. That was the last text I sent him. But the part I'm proudest of happened away from all of that. It involved the 40 men working at Brookline Commons. The ones I'd watched through the chain-link fence. The ones who had done honest work on a dishonest foundation. I made calls. A lot of calls. To the project owner. To the surety company. To the replacement contractor. To anyone who would listen. Not because I owed anybody anything. Because those workers hadn't done anything wrong. They deserved better than becoming collateral damage. Eventually, the replacement contractor agreed to retain most of the existing framing crew. Not all. Construction doesn't work that neatly. But enough. Enough that children didn't lose health insurance because of choices they never made. That mattered to me. More than the bankruptcy. More than watching my father lose everything. A few months later, Brookline Commons reopened under a different contractor. Same building. I visited one afternoon without telling anyone. The landscaping had matured. People were moving into apartments. A coffee shop on the first floor was serving customers. Life had resumed. I stood there for a while, then smiled. Around the same time, I launched the engineering firm I'd been quietly planning for years. Small. Focused. My first project wasn't glamorous. No ribbon cutting. The day the final drawings were ready, I took out my real seal. The original one. The embosser that had sat in my desk drawer through everything. That afternoon, I stamped those drawings and felt something return to me. Not power. Ownership. There's a difference. For the first time in my life, the numbers were clear. And the answer was distance.
Peace.
People think justice feels triumphant. Most of the time it feels quiet. Like finally setting down something heavy after carrying it for years. So that's my story. 3 days in a coma. One nurse who refused to take a shortcut with somebody else's life. One forged signature. And one decision to finally stop paying for a family that never intended to repay the debt. If you've made it this far, I want to ask you something. Who do you think was really wrong here? Would you ever forgive a parent who calculated your value like a business expense? Tell me in the comments. And if you've ever been the responsible one, the dependable one, subscribe and stay for more. I will see you in the next one. Thanks for listening, folks.